I'm back, nigga, I'm back. Real shit, nigga, I'm back again. Anti-mute gang, Gucci gang, anti-liberal gang shit. Let's fucking do this shit.
Ich bin kugelsicher, ich bin der Modelficker. Deines Displays, während du im Nebenzimmer FIFA doch so Fickstecher. Amputiere deinen Blick, Digga. Gib das Geld her, motherfuck you bitch and you ass nigga.
So, the reason this video took quite a long time is because I wanted to approach this neutrally and really evaluate both sides, as well as do some introspection on my part. So I hope the arguments I lay out in this video are as objective as they can be. For future videos, I have my sights set on the Nightmare Fuel Cabal, particularly on Otterface's video on pink washing and the recent spewage of new atheist hackery by Nightmare Fuel and his pal Billy Bond, both of whom blocked me on Twitter. This video is directly aimed at Muke, who I have had a falling out with for reasons not related to politics, but for something incredibly stupid that I will address later. One may wonder why I am making this video. I wouldn't be considered a Marxist-Leninist, and I have my criticisms of the USSR. I am a Deleonist, although everything I am about to say contradicts the standard Deleonist line of the Socialist Labor Party of America.
Many people are being frightened away from the liberating principles of socialism by the lying claim that socialism exists in Russia. But as the Socialist Labor Party pointed out years ago, the masters of the Russian state have, in the name of Karl Marx, betrayed everything that Marx stood for, everything that true socialism stands for. They have used socialistic phrases to disguise a bureaucratic despotism that is in every sense the direct opposite of socialism. Socialism, Marxian socialism, as applied and developed by the great American socialist Daniel DeLeon, means a society in which the industries are managed democratically by the workers themselves through socialist industrial union councils. It means the abolition of the bureaucratic political state and the setting up of a government based directly on industry.
I also agree with almost everything he just said. I do think the USSR struggled from bureaucratic despotism because of its inability to escape the bourgeois parliamentarism of Europe, which certainly led to the rise of revisionism. But ultimately the socialist program in the USSR was stuck at the fringes of the Eurosphere, hindering its economic development. So despite its failures and problems, we should also embrace its victories and triumphs. Any liberals watching this who are eager to comment that I have conceded socialism has failed and doesn't work, I'll give you a reading from Alain Badiou's book, The Communist Hypothesis. Take a scientific problem, which may well take the form of a hypothesis, until such time as it is resolved. It could be, for example, that Fermat's theorem is a hypothesis if we formulate it as for greater than n, I assume the equation x to the power of n plus y to the power of n equals z to the power of n has no whole solutions. Solutions in which x, y, and z are whole numbers. Countless attempts were made to prove this, from Fermat, who formulated the hypothesis and claimed to have proved it, but that need not concern us here, to Wills, the English mathematician, who really did prove it a few years ago. Many of those attempts became the starting point for mathematical developments of great import. Even though they did not succeed in solving the problem itself, it was therefore vital not to abandon the hypothesis for 300 years, during which it was impossible to prove it. The lessons of all the failures and the process of examining them and their implications were the lifeblood of mathematics. In that sense, failure is nothing more than the history of the proof of the hypothesis, provided that the hypothesis is not abandoned. As Mao puts it, the logic of imperialists and all reactionaries the world over is make trouble, fail, make trouble again. But the logic of the people is fight, fail again, fight again, till their victory. For those of us who aren't absolutist tankies, this is how we should confront criticism of 20th century socialism from the right. But some have taken to pure rhetoric. This is where I believe the not real socialism fallacy comes from, an excuse for one to distance themselves from past experiments. It's also convenient too, just go on some diatribe about commodity form in red fascism. It's not as if the right will understand what you are talking about. To answer the question why someone like myself would make this video, it's because I see a reason in this side of the debate, rather than as a ideological crusade. Muke's fundamental point is the existence of commodity production in the USSR, which he asserts nullifies any existence of socialism. This demonstrates a selective understanding of Marxist economics. The commodity form has existed as long as there has been such a thing as surplus, from simple commodity exchange, commodity to commodity, to the development of currency, commodity to money to commodity, then the development of commodity production from the emergence of social productive forces and private ownership, money to commodity to money. It follows logically that socialism would have its own commodity production until it could be abolished. The counter-argument is to cite various quotes by Marx and Engels where they say commodity production will be abolished under socialism. The problem here is that they assume they are being descriptive rather than prescriptive, as they assume that commodity production ought to be abolished to achieve socialism, rather than that commodity production, through developments under socialism, will be abolished. Muke makes the error of equating production for exchange with production and exchange, the latter being the case in socialist commodity production. One may say socialist commodity production is nothing but apologist rhetoric. However, there exists a real difference between commodity production under capitalism and under socialism, as explained in an article by Ching in the Peking Review. The capitalist mode of commodity production is based on the capitalist possessing the means of production and exploiting wage labor to get surplus value. Capitalist production is the highest stage of the development of commodity production. Under it, not only do the products of labor take the form of commodities, even labor power becomes a commodity. This kind of commodity production reveals the economic relations between the exploiters, who are the capitalists, and the exploited, who are the workers. Its developments make it possible for the capitalists to grab and amass great riches while the working class becomes poorer day by day. Commodity production and commodity exchange still exist in socialist society, and a commodity system is still practiced. This is mainly because two kinds of socialist ownership, namely ownership by the whole people and collective ownership, exist side by side. No unpaid allocations of products between different ownerships of the public economy can be practiced. Their economic relations can only be commodity exchange and hence commodity production. State distribution of consumer goods among workers and staff also utilizes the form of commodity exchange through money. However, the socialist type of commodity production differs from the capitalist type. This is manifested chiefly by the fact that there is no longer the economic relation of exploitation of workers by the capitalists. Anarchism in production has been eliminated and the scope of commodity exchange has been reduced. Yet it must be noted that bourgeois right unavoidably exists in distribution and exchange in socialist society. The principle of exchange of equal values is still carried out in commodity exchange. If bourgeois right in distribution and exchange is developed and extended at will, capitalist ideas of amassing fortunes and craving for profits will spread unchecked. Such phenomena as turning public property into private property, graft and corruption, theft and bribery, and speculation will arise, and there will be a change in the nature of the system of ownership in certain developments and units which will follow the revisionist line. The inevitable result will be polarization, i.e. a small number of people will acquire an increasing quantity of commodities and money and convert them into capital. These people will turn out to be new bourgeois elements. The laboring people, on the other hand, once again will become oppressed and exploited wage slaves. Therefore, bourgeois right as regards distribution and exchange has to be restricted under the dictatorship of the proletariat, and conditions for finally eliminating the commodity system must gradually be created. Muke's final assessment is the existence of wage labor and subsequently surplus extraction, which he lambasted Jason Unruh for asserting there is a socialist way of extracting a surplus. What Muke fails to understand is that exploitative surplus extraction necessitates appropriation without compensation. However, in the USSR, the social product was compensated in the form of infrastructure and state services, such as education and healthcare. Ernest Mandel, who was a Trotskyist might I add, explains this in his introduction to Marxist economic theory. How does social surplus product come into existence? It arises as a consequence of gratuitous appropriation, that is, an appropriation without compensation, by a ruling class of a part of the production of a producing class. When the slave worked 6 days a week on a plantation, and the total product of his labor was taken by the master without any compensation to the slave, the origin of the social surplus product here is in the gratuitous labor, the uncompensated labor, supplied by the slave to the master. When the serf worked 3 days a week on the lord's land, the origin of this income, of this social surplus product, is also to be found in the uncompensated labor, the gratuitous labor, furnished. We will further see on that the origin of capitalist surplus value, that is to say, the revenue of the bourgeois class in capitalist society. It is exactly the same. It is uncompensated labor, gratuitous labor, which the proletarian, the wage worker, gives the capitalist without receiving any value in exchange. While payment in the USSR took the form of ruble wages, its monetary form differed from capitalist wage labor. If one reads Wage Labor in Capital, you would know that wages, being the price of labor as a commodity, labor power, is regulated by the same market forces, being supply and demand, just as any commodity on the market. However, this was not the case in the USSR, where an increase in these ruble wages wouldn't lead to an increase in real wages. This different monetary form that ruble wages took in the USSR is explained by Paul Cockshott in Towards a New Socialism. Soviet socialism, particularly following the introduction of the first five-year plan under Stalin in the late 1920s, introduced a new and non-capitalist mode of extraction of a surplus. This is somewhat obscured by the fact that workers were still paid ruble wages, and that money continued in use as a unit of account in the planned industries. But the social content of these monetary forms changed drastically. Under Soviet planning, the division between the necessary and surplus portions of the social product was the result of political decisions. For the most part, goods and labor were physically allocated to enterprises by the planning authorities, who would always ensure that the enterprises had enough money to pay for the real goods allocated to them. If an enterprise made monetary losses and therefore had to have its money balances topped up with subsidies, that was no matter. On the other hand, possession of money as such was no guarantee of being able to get hold of real goods. By the same token, the resources going into production of consumer goods were centrally allocated. Suppose the workers won higher ruble wages. By itself, this would achieve nothing, since the flow of production of consumer goods was not responsive to the monetary amount of consumer spending. Higher wages would simply mean higher prices or shortages in the shops. The rate of production of a surplus was fixed when the planners allocated resources to investment in heavy industry and to the production of consumer goods respectively.
Kid, your theory is bad, and you should feel bad.